All right. Our topic today is really waking up. The whole sense of uh, waking up to who we are, who all this is, and my way of languaging it is love melting into love. Uh, Traditions have different ways of talking about this ultimate waking up. You know, Zen guys talk about satori. Uh, Tibetans talk about the one taste. Um, there's stages along the way, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the sense of a structure that we can lean on a little bit. Uh, most uh, genuine spiritual traditions have somewhere between 6 and 8 stages, but they're really fine tuning it. We'll just sort of simplify it. They're all stages of melting, and uh, what is the heat? That's a good question. So Rebecca West was a, a great British author, woman author in the middle of the 20th century, and she died sort of, I think, in the 70s, 1970s. But she was commenting on this world we're living in, which people have called a postmodern world. Now, of course, the folks that my dear friends in Haiti, they're living in the pre-modern world in a lot of cases. So a lot of the planet is living in a kind of pre-modern world. Modernity and science and every technology and all that made for the modern world, and now sort of what they call a postmodern world. That sort of might be confusing. What is a postmodern world? Well, Rebecca West, towards the end of her life, she felt it, and she uh, uh, she was asked to name the mood of the late 20th century, which is, for her, being in Britain, was the postmodern world. And she said the mood of the postmodern world was a desperate search for a pattern. Let that sink in for a minute. A desperate search for a pattern. Pre-modern uh, world, which maybe it would cover about 60 to 70% of the world, where modernity, has not reached in. For instance, in our uh, twin parish in Haiti, where I've been working for almost 40 years, we're trying to bring electricity in there. you know, there's so many people who don't have electricity. We put in a flush toilet at the school for the teachers. You know, there's many so many people on the planet are still in a kind of pre-modern world who don't even have the benefits of science and technology. But there's sort of a downside to it as well. Everything is always paradoxical, really, in this time and space world. And so, within the advent of uh, technology and uh, the science and in the health field and everywhere, all that kind of stuff, there's something lost too. We seem to have lost the pattern that some older cultures and pre-modern cultures still have. And that was sort of the bargain in the 18th century when science started exploding, and the 1700s. Um, we threw all of sort of what we knew about the spirit. We threw all that baby out with the bathwater of the all the negative things that came with organized religion and the empire and all that stuff, the Holy Roman Empire, amongst other things. And so we threw a lot of that out, and we just went full bore for science, and that was explainable. It did change life on a level that was real positive in most cases. Some downside too, if you happen to live near the factories. Definitely a downside, still is. But So we lost sort of that pattern. Gregory Bateson, who was married to Margaret Mead, a couple of great beings married to each other. He said it's about finding the pattern that connects. That's what we're looking for, because it's been lost in the rush to modernity. And so I want to look at that, and I want to look at how that plays into uh, and what part waking up and to the spirit, waking up to the sense of inner and outer connectivity and wholeness, how that all works and how that fits in. You don't really have to trade off uh, evolution of your consciousness via meditation. You don't have to trade that off. You don't have to get rid of everything. It's more like a sense of integration as you go along. We never really integrated what was lost. If you want to read a really great book on this, Houston Smith, the guy who wrote the Religions of Man, he later called it Religions of the World. Uh, he wrote a book called Forgotten Truth. And he talks about just that, the truths that were forgotten in the whole rush of science for the last 200 years. And, you know, you have postmodern people in this world and all the advanced technological countries, uh, feeling like, what am I doing here? They've lost the pattern, as Rebecca West said. So here's a great poem. I've got a couple of uh, old poems, a couple of new poems that will sort of help me explain uh, a little bit about this pattern and help us grasp with this essential postmodern sense of, sort of lostness. Uh, we have, I'm living in two houses here, uh, which even one of these two houses would be like a mansion in most countries and would house a lot of people. And we've got a heat pump and we've got a roof and got food in the fridge. Yet we're more anxious than the people I meet in Haiti. Uh, this anxiety is probably also part of the mood. And anxiety can go everywhere from just a mild kind of refrigerator hum anxiety all the time, you don't even notice it, to full blown panic and despair and all that. So here's one of my favorite poems. It's called The Way It Is. Most of you heard it before, but it sort of fits into the talk today. William Stafford, who was really one of my main teachers in poetry, writing poetry. He's a great writer. He wrote this towards the end of his life, and the title suggests that he finally sort of figured out the way it is. He said, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. It's hard for others to see. While you hold it, though, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding, but you don't ever let go of the thread. There's a thread you follow. Goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. Yeah, right there. That's an image. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. That's what we're looking for. Everything's changing, and then what science has brought to us is more rapid change. And such rapid change, it feels sort of like chaos sometimes. And, but he says there's something that goes through that. This thread goes through that, and it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. I don't know if you know what that line means, but I know what that line means. You know, people say, "Well, what do you do?" you know, I can't just, I just, it's a hard question to answer when you're in a kind of life that I'm living. But even, even when you retire, well, what do you do? Say, that's not the thread, not what you do. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. I might go as far as to say it's impossible for us to see the thread and what each of us is pursuing, even in this community. Well, unless we tell one another, that's the only way we know what's going on inside people. And the thread is inside, you see. It's not in what we do. So nobody asks you, what are you? What do you be? Nobody asks you that. They say, what do you do? Because that's always looking at the outside. Yeah. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, though, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have had an enlightenment experience, or if you've even stabilized an enlightening experience, like the great many of the great people in the past. You still are going to get old, and this body's going to die. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding, but you don't ever let go of the thread. And my Tibetan brothers and sisters would contend you take that thread beyond the death of the body. Yeah, so uh, you don't ever let go of the thread. Well, most people don't have a thread. Maybe the thread was your 401k, well then poof, if you remember 2009, poof, a lot of that goes. Or you're living in Asheville and the flood wipes out everything, and you're walking around in the same set of clothes. I mean, that's not the thread, but that could all go. See, so we're talking about that. And so now I'm going to put up the screensaver again, and we'll work off that to see really talk about the thread. Share it, especially if you came in late, maybe you didn't see it. And you people who are listening to this on YouTube, here's what we had for our like screensaver as people came in. And it's got the subtitle. Really, today's title is Waking Up, Love Melting into Love. Okay. And now the screensaver is really interesting. My wife thought I was losing my mind as I've got this glass heart that you're looking at, and I've got a bunch of ice cubes and put it in, and then left it on the table to melt. And she walked in. She said, "What the hell are you doing with those ice cubes?" And I said, "The thread. It's about the thread." And she just looked at me the way she normally looks at me, and that's shook her head and left. And then so they melted throughout the day, and then I took a second picture when it was almost melted, but there was just a few of those little remnants left, uh, just so you could really see the water. Uh, and then underneath it, I had put something that I have normally hanging on the window here. It's hanging there now. It was just that heart thing. And I put that actually under the thing. You can't see it at first in the left frame. Left frame, you got, I tried to, get something that would approximate this group. Sometimes there's 40 people show up here. So there's just somewhere 30, 40 ice cubes there. All these separate ice cubes, very cold, sharp edges, bumping into one another. This is an image of the baseline of consciousness, what people call in various traditions egoic consciousness. It's what we come out with because we sort of uh, we're all born. as Wordsworth say, we all come into this world trailing clouds of glories that are all too soon forgotten. Uh, it's a kind of amnesia. We forget if we had a previous life and who knows what we were, we've forgotten it. I've even had reincarnated Buddhists who I had a couple of them stay here. One of them was a reincarnation of a previous teacher. Even the Dalai Lama himself didn't. He forgot most of the details of all those previous lives. He remembered only a couple, and the same with the guy who was here, the Rinpoche who was here. But what they maintain is a kind of core structure. We all look different, but on the inside of us, our core structure is the same. We all have a spinal column, where you don't, if you're born with a birth defect, that would change. But most of us, high 99% of us, have the same structure on the inside, although our outside looks very different. So this is egoic consciousness, which is from all the spiritual tradition. It's how we're born, because when we're separated from our mother, that's trauma number one. If you don't think you're a trauma survivor, think again. You don't have to be in war. Uh, we're all trauma survivors. We're here, but that initial trauma of just being in sort of kind of bliss state, uh, you don't even have to make breakfast or lunch or dinner. It's all like loaded right in, just, and the air and everything, it all comes through. You're not even breathing yet. Your mother's oxygen is coming through. I mean, it's about, it's kind of a bliss state. And then all of a sudden, your known world where you're pretty chilled out and you're warm and comfy too at the same time, it starts contracting at 100 pounds per square inch. And it seems like that thing you trusted is trying to crush you. And then you go through this long dark chamber with, every once in a while you think the crushing's over, and then all of a sudden it starts again. And we all went through that. And then we came out, and then they cut the cord. And that is the initial trauma of a feeling of separation. And we all start there. It doesn't matter if you're the Dalai Lama number 13, he started there. We all start there. Now, here's just, it's just a view of our core belief. We all have a core belief. I'm a student of the Enneagram, and it works into different shades and different emphases, depending, you're 1, 2, 3. That it's really talking about the different kind of tone of that core belief, but the core belief of all of us is the same. It doesn't matter if you know the Enneagram, it doesn't matter if you're American or you're Haitian. Our core belief of everybody's childhood operating system is this: I am separate from what I experience. Just get that down. That's the major thing. That we have this belief because we really don't we don't have cognitive, our brain hasn't fully developed yet, but we just have this feeling that I'm separate now. And that is the basis of what I call the childhood operating system. And we're operating on that. Mom's not connected to me anymore. And we want, we're afraid. So fear is actually what the fuel that runs our childhood operating system. We're afraid, and that's helpful, really, because then we're trying to get mommy to feed us, one way or another, and we kept warm and taken care of. Our diapers changed. We have to, so we really start to figure a way to hustle all those things to happen, which is quite amazing, really, quite amazing, really, and we're born with the least amount of kind of habit energy, like a young colt born and he's up in a couple minutes and gambling around and can find his mother, where we can't do that. So we don't have that ability. That's why we have to have parents that will take care of us much more than almost any other animal, say, and it's scary. And so that becomes our core belief, and that's what the bowl of separate ice cubes is, and it's a sort of cold life. And it's meant to take us into out of the house into some kind of education where we learn that, when we develop higher cognitive thing, reason, we can understand words, we can speak words, then we can listen to other people telling us their view of reality, uh, teachers, and then you can actually start to outgrow most of the fear-based childhood operating system. You don't want to be fearless. You don't want to just start walking in front of buses, and there's something positive about fear, but not to the level that it dominates our life. Here's a good almost a Buddhist koan that you write down, and you can sit with this koan for a while. What would I do if I wasn't afraid? What would I do if I wasn't afraid? With this life, with this moment, you see, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And that's a big question for everybody. And that fear that I'm talking about is more like this lurking for decades, this lurking fear of just anxiety. It's not necessarily, what the difference between fear and anxiety is, if I was sitting here and I'd, to be afraid that any moment a rhinoceros is going to bust through this door over here and then come and gore around at me, uh, that's anxiety. That's a mental thing that, and that's mostly what we're talking about. That's the dukkha that the Buddha is talking about, is just this, from this original fear of separation. We feel it's me and the world, and there are all these other ice cubes out there who are playing the same game, and so they got sharp edges, and you get hurt. Your parents hadn't worked it out. My parents hadn't worked it out. Uh, my kids had a parent who didn't work it out. And so when you do stuff, you know, uh, based on fear, it just grips you, and I could have put that thing, when they started to melt, I could have put them back in the freezer and froze them up again. And life sort of does that. Your dad does something mean to you, and then it reinforces that idea that this is a cold, hard world. Now the truth is, and this is the truth of the spiritual traditions, all of them really. The truth is, we are never separate from the experience. We're never separate from the experience of the sacred mystery. You could call that God, you could call that Allah. There are different languages for it, but it's just this everything all at once, all together, the sacred mystery. We're never separate from the experience of that, from the oneness with the spirit. Now that is the spiritual truth. We can only think we are. I got that in parentheses there. We can only think we are, and boy, we can. For decades, for me, and so I was hustling for love for my first 60 years, just hustling for it. We're all hustling for love in our own way, and and there's always this lurking fear that no matter how I hustle, how hard I hustle, I won't get it. I could lose it. Okay, because of this basic thing, I'm separate from what I experience, and that experience could hurt me. That experience could stay between me and love, and all that kind of stuff. That's just basic. Now, uh, and we can only think we're separate, and that's why thinking and meditation. That's why it's said every tradition, although they have all their own methodologies, they basically say, all right, for 20 minutes, let's stop thinking. Let's take thinking off the board. You're still thinking, of course. The left brain just goes on and on. Uh, but uh, but there's somewhere or another we're trying to lay it aside and go somewhere else, and we're actually trying to find the thread somewhere else, because you'll never think your way to love. You'll never think your way to unity consciousness. Now, probably about, maybe there's 30 of us here, probably about 20 of us at least have had at least a moment where it all stopped and we felt connected with everything. Most people have that, and maybe it goes by. Maybe it's a walk where everything is just perfect. Maybe it's a sunset. Maybe it's a meditation. Maybe it's in a crisis where you do something you never thought you could do. Little 120-pound guys will lift a car off somebody. How do they do that? Well, they say, "Oh, it's." But there's a sense of people try to risk their own lives to save another. Uh, if you thought about it, you wouldn't do it. But there's something else working here. There's something else working. Now, the search for this oneness, the search for this state where you actually feel that it's tricky. It's tricky. Like when you look at the uh, how you get from just being one ice cube in a big bowl of ice cubes, which is a lot of life, to actually melting into one. Uh, it actually is all the melting happens in your mind because you're all connected to it. I mean, how do we breathe in and out on our own? How does the heart beat on its own? I mean, we're connected with some bigger system for sure. But the Sufi parable, which I think just wipes out in a way the childhood operating system, at least for a moment. The Sufi parable says, there's 10,000 waves. They're going towards the Arabian Peninsula to shore, and this wave just starts to occur, starts to break. It's a young wave, and then there's a much bigger wave over here. And as the parable goes, the young wave goes over to the old wave, and he says, "Hey, you've been around longer than I have. Uh, I've heard about this thing called the ocean. Have you ever heard about it?" The bigger wave said, "Yes, I've heard about it, but I've never actually seen one." That's the end of the parable. It's very much like Jesus's parables. They're like koans, and you know, yeah, I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen. Well, you can sort of laugh there. It's because it's obvious when you look at it in that parable form. Every wave is all ocean all the time. That's one of the best images I know of how we get all confused and how we get unconfused. Even when the wave gets big and then it's rolling there and then it gets smaller and then you see the waves of ahead of you, these good looking wave over there, and then all of a sudden it disappears. That's when you go to the wave psychologist or spiritual director. Say, hey, these waves are disappearing. If you get old as I am, you really have seen some waves disappear. My nephew's wave disappeared few weeks ago. There was a wave and then sort of disappeared. And that freaks you out. Aging, death, you know. Death is when the waveform disappears. In Tibet, again, there were some of my wisest teachers. They say there's no dead people in Tibet, they're dead bodies. But then the energy of that goes on. And that wave that disappears and goes up to the sand and then appears to disappear. Is it ever not all ocean all the time? It's going back in to the ocean. It's never left the ocean. Those are really interesting images that talk about the thread. What is the thread? See, and that to run around looking for God would be like a wave asking the question. You ever heard about the ocean? You don't have to look for God. You don't have to look for the spirit, for the one. You are part of it. You cannot be separated from it. There's no way. Only you could think you are. You could be convinced you are. And that's what the Buddha woke up from. He's a guy who woke up. He woke up from this idea of a separate existence. That's what Merton woke up from on the street corner, 4th and Broadway at that time, 4th and Walnut. He said the whole idea of a separate holy existence. He added holy because, he was a monk behind the walls, as if you could wall out reality. He said the whole idea of a separate holy existence is a dream. He woke up from the dream. Now, what was special about the Buddha and And Merton and the other great spiritual figures, when they have that waking up experience that they're part of the unity, they're part of the one, then how can you live accordingly? And Merton was able, he was the most recent guy. The reason I'm sitting here because I got interested in Merton, came to the monastery, et cetera. And then the thread is very interesting that leads from one thing to another. But uh, he lived the last 10 years of his life according to that breakthrough. The Buddha lived for the rest of his life. He didn't forget it. He integrated it, you see. And so when we have experiences which are just a state of oneness, and then it disappears. Again, we're homo amnesians, it disappears. Well, so we're trying to pay attention to that, and we're also trying to integrate. We're trying to live accordingly to this truth, you see. And we're going to spend, some time talking about that in the future weeks. How do you, what are we really doing here? And how do you sort of fold in these experiences that you might get in meditation or in just in life? How do you fold that in to the dough of your own life? It's a slow process, but gradually you live according to the truth rather than according to fear, according to that original childhood thing. And it takes a long time. I've been doing this a long time and still have miles to go before I sleep. Now here's an old poem, and it's not that old. If you have uh, the Cave of the Heart, which many of you have, because I'd like to send it out to people. It's dedicated to the people in this community. If you're new, by the way, or newer, and you don't have a copy of the Cave of the Heart, which is my latest book of poems, just send me an email with your address in it, and I'll send you a copy. Because this poem is in there. It's called Coming Attractions. I was just talking to somebody during the week, and she reminded me of this poem, and it did fit into the talk. Coming Attractions, like the teasers you get, for the next episode. Coming Attractions. We Homo amnesians are just a micro blip in the vast unfolding universe. We're forgetful, crazy cats, but we're feral and hungry and can occasionally surprise. I mean, the surprise of waking up, of the Buddha, of anybody. Yeah, we're forgetful, but we're feral and hungry. There is a kind of hunger in us for this oneness. We don't even know what we're hungry for. We try everything else. I've met monks who said they tried everything, and then they realized that they were going for this one thing, to feel this unity and actually live a life accordingly. We're feral and hungry and can occasionally surprise. The omega point isn't a point at all. The omega point is a term that Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit archaeologist and just real spiritual genius, he's somebody who went all the way with this. He said there's a point we're all evolving to. He was an evolutionary guy, and he wasn't just talking about physical evolution. He was talking about the evolution of this oneness in spirit. And he said the omega point isn't a point at all, but rather an event horizon. You might not know that term, but it's having to do with astrophysics. But rather an event horizon, a force we are drawn to and irresistibly drawn into, the ultimate black hole that some call love. Yeah, there's this thing pulling us like a tractor beam if you watch Star Wars. But really, the black holes where a star has imploded and then it gets so dense that you can't even see it. No light can escape it. And if you get too close to one of those, it'll take you in. I like the idea of a black hole as what's pulling us because darkness, the cloud of unknowing in the 14th century great Christian text. It's about the thing that's pulling you, you can't see. It's too deep and it's got too much gravitas to it, but it's pulling you. And we're pulled by unseen realities. Now, some people, if you're what I would call a believer in scientism, well, unless you can film it, measure it, whatever, it doesn't exist unless it's material reality. Well, that was like the flattening out of our whole culture there. And the guys who go into really even the real big world of astrophysics or the unbelievably tiny world of quantum physics, they realize that all even matter comes from an unseen reality. Yeah, so get this image. There is a force drawing us all, and the astrophysics physicists call it a black hole, and a black. We always make black and darkness about something evil or whatever. White people do anyway, and but it just means you can't see it. It's in the dark. It's in other words, you can't go there here with the left brain. Okay. Uh, and I as a poet, I call it love. This force that's attracting. A Christian will call it love. Somebody else will call it whatever they call it. Okay, and and that's sort of the deal. And then the last stanza is theophany. Theophany is a word that means um, to see the sacred in everything. That's how mystic looks at the world. When you reach the end of the evolutionary process, sometimes that's called, you're in the mystic class. There's only God in everything. My first Zen master, Suzuki Roshi, had reached that because he said, you be prepared to bow to everything, even dust bunnies, because everything is sacred. Everything like has the light of the sacred, It's and theophany will trump theology and empire eventually. That this force will actually trump theology and empire, unless you may be unaware of the fact that if you're an American, you're living in the empire. The empire strikes back, and then there's something more powerful than even the empire that we're in. And revolution is evolution. And the evolution of consciousness is the only real revolution that's coming. And that's what we're involved in here in this group, the evolution of consciousness. And it's just not random. It's being pulled to an omega point. You can call it love, you can call it enlightenment, satori. There's all these, and then there's actually the next phase. Once you live according to that. That's where you bring it into your daily life. That's what's important. That's what's important. Yeah. That's what I call coming attractions, because you have to have a sense of that. Now the thread, you can ruin poetry and you can ruin sacred text by being literal about it, saying this means that. That's where fundamentalists in all traditions tend to ruin the sacred text that probably came out of, people who had this big view, especially in the Old Testament, the prophets, then they had the biggest view. They were constantly telling, all the kings and the whole empire guys, hey, that's not the deal. That's why they didn't get treated so well, including Jesus. He was a prophet of that ilk. But one I would suggest for our work in the meditative world, in a meditative practice that we do, that thread, and that's the if the screensaver, the thread is right in the middle. It's that picture, and that is awareness. And again, I've looked at a lot of systems of talking about the structure of this whole journey, but basically, we all start out as that ice cube with a bunch of other ice cubes, separate beings that we're afraid of or trying to hustle. And then when you've completely melted into oneness with everything, well, the in between stages are stages of melting, and heat melts ice, and awareness. And what I would say, actually, I'd use two words to talk about the thread in this situation. The thread is wholehearted awareness. And, wholehearted is sort of the Department of Redundancy department there, because uh, the heart, this group is called Heart to Heart. The heart is that part of our being that's invisible. We have a physical heart, and we point to the center of our chest because that's central to the journey. The heart is different than the left brain, the thinker. The heart is about awareness. The heart is aware, and the heart has a holistic kind of awareness. That's why I call it wholehearted awareness, to be overly blunt about the fact that when you're in awareness, you're just aware of the whole picture. And when you're in meditation, when you catch yourself thinking, that's what catches you thinking. Not thinking, not the left brain. The left brain's chugging along and you're making connections or whatever. And then, when you're trying to lay thinking aside, well, then the heart, wholehearted awareness notices and says, hey, remember, that's about the only rule is when you catch yourself thinking, you let the thought go and you sink back down. Look at that picture, the head up on the surface of things and it's surrounded by darkness. And then as it descends, that, Jesus talked about the narrow way. It is a very narrow way. It's like a thread, you see. But then when you hit awareness, it's luminous, it's warm. And to become acquainted with that is what meditation's about. To pay visits to that place frequently, and just hang out there. And that's really what meditation is about. It's about the direct experience of wholehearted awareness. And when you're in wholehearted awareness, that explains this other word that they throw around sometimes in spirituality, presence. To be present. There's a great French text called Practicing the Presence of God. Well, this is what it's talking about, to be wholehearted aware. And then, in modern Buddhist terms, to live that way would be called mindfulness. So whatever you're doing, you're aware of it. You're not lost in thought. How many mistakes have we made because we're doing something and we get sort of lost in some thought and then you goof up? It's incredible. It's incredible. So this is the deal. When you're in awareness, when, that's what they say, when you walk, walk. When you sit, sit. When you talk, talk. That's that sense of there's a wholeness there. That's the hidden wholeness in us. Is what we call the heart, and the heart is the place for awareness, and it sees the world differently. It has a different pair of glasses. We're going to talk about this in the future weeks in terms of both how to do this kind of practice of meditation, which is very rare practice, but it's the only way you can wake up. And then there's that's not enough because you can wake up for a moment and then go back to sleep for decades. But then how do we integrate that into the life? How do we live accordingly? That's growing up. And that's, we're going to spend some time in the future talking about what it really means. Even once you've awakened, how do you grow up? So awakening looks very different depending on whether you're still in infantile parts of consciousness, or that you can actually integrate it. So we'll talk about that in the future. But for now, wholehearted awareness is what melts the ice cube, is the stage of melting. And that's the focus. When we come back for our meditation period, about 15 minutes, a poem on dropping into wholehearted awareness and just resting there. Okay, I think that's pretty good for today. Thank you for listening.